Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep into a topic today that's almost guaranteed to pop up on your UPSC exams.
Oh yeah, definitely a big one.
The Iranian Revolution of 1979.
Huge.
This wasn't just a change of government.
No.
It was a total transformation of Iran,
Absolutely.
which sent shockwaves throughout the Middle East and really reshaped global politics.
Still feeling those today. We've got some amazing sources for this deep dive,
Yeah, we do.
focusing specifically on the revolution itself and also
And also a
timeline,
timeline.
highlighting all the key events in the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Now, those might seem like two totally separate things.
They do, yeah.
But trust me,
They're connected.
they are more connected
And you might think.
than you might think.
Yeah.
So think of this deep dive as your secret weapon for understanding the revolution's causes, its lasting impact, and why it still matters so much today.
It's gonna be good.
It's going to be good.
We're gonna unpack why this revolution was so significant, both on the ground, in Iran, and on the global stage.
Exactly. Now, our sources start with a scene that's like something straight out of a movie. Ayatollah Khomeini's return from exile in 1979.
Oh yeah, dramatic.
Imagine millions of Iranians flooding the streets of Tehran,
Wow.
ecstatic to welcome him back.
Yeah. This was not just a homecoming, though, right?
No, absolutely not.
This was the beginning of a major power shift.
Absolutely.
And it happened so fast.
It did. It was incredible. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, he was forced to flee.
Out of there.
And within weeks, Khomeini takes control and establishes this new system of personal rule.
And boom, in a matter of months,
Yeah,
Iran declares itself an Islamic Republic.
it's amazing. And this rapid change really tells us something, doesn't it?
I think so. What do you think it tells us?
It shows that dissatisfaction with the Shah's regime was bubbling under the surface for years,
Yeah, I was just waiting to erupt.
waiting to boil over.
Absolutely.
It's like someone just lit a match
And boom.
and the whole nation transformed.
I like that analogy, yeah.
And Khomeini's vision, our sources highlight this, was to create a truly Islamic state, shaped by his very specific interpretation of religious principles.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you prepping for the UPSC mains, this is where you need to start connecting the dots.
Yeah, definitely. Think about the social and political changes that followed.
Huge changes, right?
Oh, massive. These weren't just cosmetic. This was a complete overhaul. Sharia law became the foundation of the legal system. A new theocratic constitution was put in place, and power consolidated within the Shia religious elite.
And we can see this playing out in everyday life. Mandatory headscarves for women, the lifting of restrictions on polygamy, and the introduction of harsh punishments for adultery and homosexuality. You really can't understand the revolution without understanding these changes and the ideology driving them.
Absolutely. And that's where understanding the concept of Islamism comes in.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, the revolution really emboldened those who believed that Islamic principle should be the guiding force in political and social life. Think about groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, which gained traction in other parts of the Middle East around this time.
So the Iranian Revolution becomes this kind of beacon,
Right, an example.
this example of how Islamic principles could be used to challenge existing power structures.
Like Western influence.
Exactly, Western influence.
Precisely.
Now, we talked about the seizure of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in 1979.
Can't forget that one. Huge turning point.
I know, a major moment. It wasn't just symbolic. It was a direct challenge to American power and really a sign of things to come.
It really was. Now, speaking of challenges to the existing order,
Yeah.
our sources bring up this term militant Islam,
Right.
which is something you'll definitely encounter in your UPSC studies.
For sure, a key term.
It's a complex concept, though.
Oh, very complex.
And our sources offer some pretty thought-provoking perspectives on it.
Okay, so tell me more about that.
Well, for example, Bernard Lewis argued that the Muslim world, and particularly the Arab world, felt deeply humiliated by a series of historical events. We're talking the decline of the Ottoman Empire, its division by Western powers after World War I, and of course, the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict.
So this feeling of historical grievance, of being sidelined and exploited, becomes a really powerful motivator,
For sure.
fueling a desire to reassert Islamic identity and power on the world stage.
Exactly. And we see this playing out in so many ways, from the rise of groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon to the emergence of al-Qaeda on a global scale.
And all these movements, while distinct in their tactics and goals,
Oh, for sure.
they share this common thread,
What's that?
this rejection of Western dominance and a desire to establish Islamic states based on their interpretations of religious principles.
You got it.
Now, it's really important to remember that Islamism itself isn't the monolithic entity.
Right. Good.
Our sources make a clear distinction between different branches, like Wahhabism and Shia Islam, each with their own approaches to Islamic principles.
Absolutely. Understanding those nuances is crucial for your UPSC prep. You can't just lump all Islamist movements together. You need to be able to analyze their specific ideologies, motivations, and their impact on both regional and global politics.
Yeah, for instance, compare the strict interpretation of Sharia law practiced in Saudi Arabia, which is heavily influenced by Wahhabism, to the more nuanced approach seen in Iran under Khomeini Shia leadership.
Exactly. Great example. And then there's the whole concept of constitutional Islamism, right?
Right.
Groups like Turkey's Justice and Development Party, or AK Party, trying to reconcile Islamic values with democratic principles.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is, for sure. But it shows that there's a whole spectrum of approaches within Islamism.
And a spectrum that I'm sure UPSC examiners
Oh, yeah, they love it.
love to test students on.
Definitely. They want to see that you can go beyond simplistic explanations and really dig into those complexities.
It's all the details, right?
You got it.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the lead up to the revolution, Khomeini's vision for an Islamic state, those social and political changes that followed, and the broader concept of Islamism. But we're not done yet. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dig deeper into the revolution's impact on the global stage and its connections to the ever-present Arab-Israeli conflict.
And we'll also be exploring some specific example of Islamist movements and how they've shaped the geopolitical landscape. It's going to be a wild ride. Buckle up.
And before we go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a like if you're finding this deep dive helpful. We're here to help you ace those UPSC exams, so let us know what you want to explore next.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Iranian Revolution. We're picking up right where we left off, exploring how this event really sent shockwaves across the globe.
And it continues to shape international relations to this day. And let's not forget our UPSC aspirants out there.
Of course not. There are stars. This stuff is pure gold for understanding the complex dynamics of the Middle East and acing those exams.
Absolutely. Okay, so we talked about how the Iranian Revolution really emboldened those forces of what we called militant Islam.
Right. It wasn't just talk. It gave them a blueprint, for challenging Western influence and establishing these Islamic states.
Yeah, and we touched on the seizure of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran.
A major moment, for sure.
But there's another piece of this puzzle that's really relevant, especially for understanding Iran's power today in the region.
What's that?
Their pursuit of nuclear weapons.
Oh, yeah. That's where things get really interesting and, honestly, a bit unnerving.
A bit scary.
Our sources point out that when Saddam Hussein was overthrown back in 2003, that really changed things.
It did. It created a power vacuum, right?
Yeah, and with the Shia-led government taking over in Iraq,
Right.
that really boosted Iran's influence in the region.
So Iran sees an opportunity, right?
Seizes it.
To assert itself. But why the focus on nuclear weapons? Some people would say it's for energy, right? Peaceful purposes.
That's the argument, yeah. And it's one you might even need to address in your UPSC answers.
Absolutely.
But you have to consider the bigger picture. Iran has been pretty openly hostile towards Israel.
Right.
And we all know Israel has its own nuclear arsenal.
Right.
So imagine a nuclear-armed Iran added to that mix.
Well, it's a recipe for disaster.
Go to powder keg.
Right.
The stakes get raised dramatically, and it becomes a massive flashpoint in international relations.
Talk about a potential global crisis.
Exactly.
And that's why understanding Iran's nuclear ambitions is so crucial for those UPSC essays on international security. I mean, this is a recurring theme.
It comes up again and again. And it's not just about Iran's capabilities either, right?
No, absolutely not.
It's about how their actions are perceived by their neighbors and, frankly, the whole global community.
It's all about regional power dynamics.
Sure.
And how Iran fits into that. Because, let's be real, every action has a reaction.
It does. And those reactions can set off a whole chain of events. It gets unpredictable really fast.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit here.
Okay, where are we headed?
Let's delve into the Arab-Israeli conflict. Remember that timeline we mentioned?
I do, yeah.
Well, it highlights how intertwined this conflict is with everything we've been talking about,
Makes sense.
including Iran's ambitions in the region.
Iran's a big player.
A huge player. Okay, so just so we're all on the same page, we're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right?
Right.
But why is this so important in this context with Iran?
Well, think back to what we were saying. The Iranian Revolution emboldened a lot of people and groups who want to challenge the world order, right? The existing world order.
Right.
And the Arab-Israeli conflict is a perfect example of a situation where many people in the Muslim world see that order as deeply unjust.
Right, so Iran sees this as an opportunity, right?
Oh, absolutely. To position itself as a champion for the Palestinians.
Right.
And further challenge Western influence in the region.
So they're playing a very strategic game here.
They are. And by supporting groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, Iran gets allies and really proxies in this regional power play. But it also adds fuel to the fire of the conflict itself.
Making peace even more elusive.
You got it. It's
Yeah.
like a tangled web of alliances and rivalries.
I know it's complicated. And speaking of complicated, our timeline takes us all the way back to 1917
Wow, way back.
with the Balfour Declaration. Can you remind us what that was all about?
Yeah, the Balfour Declaration was a statement from the British government during World War I that basically promised support for the creation of a Jewish national home in Palestine.
And that, of course, was land that was already inhabited by a large Palestinian Arab population. Talk about setting the stage for conflict.
It was a decision with huge consequences that, frankly, we're still dealing with today. The declaration really fueled the Zionist movement,
Right.
leading to more and more Jewish immigration to Palestine, which ultimately contributed to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War.
Right. And that war resulted in the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and, of course, the creation of the State of Israel. It's like every attempt to resolve this conflict just leads to more conflict.
That's a key point. This conflict is marked by these cycles of violence and a deep, deep mistrust.
Oh, absolutely.
And our timeline points out all the major events. The Suez Crisis, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War.
Each one adding another layer of complexity and trauma.
Exactly. And these weren't just battles over territory. We're talking about identity, about competing claims to the same land.
Fueled by these historical and religious narratives.
Exactly. And then you add the Cold War into the mix.
No, right.
The Soviet Union backing the Arab states and the U.S. supporting Israel.
It becomes this global power struggle.
It does. So not just regional anymore, but global. No wonder it's been so hard to find a solution.
It's almost impossible to untangle it all. But our timeline does mention some attempts at peace, right?
It does. The Camp David Accords in '78, which led to that peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, huge. And the Oslo Accords in the '90s, which were supposed to bring about a two-state solution.
I mean, those were major breakthroughs.
They were.
But they didn't lead to lasting peace. Why not?
Both agreements faced huge obstacles.
Like what?
Well, with the Camp David Accords, the Palestinian issue wasn't really addressed directly.
So they kind of left that hanging.
Right. And then the Oslo Accords, while they had so much promise, they fell apart because of a lack of trust. And of course, there was continued violence and political complexities, frankly, on both sides.
Right. So we've got this long, complex history of conflict, failed peace attempts, and now we're throwing the Iranian Revolution into the mix. It's a lot to process.
It is. But honestly, this is exactly the kind of scenario that UPSC examiners love to test you on. They want to know if you can look at this historical context, understand those different narratives, and figure out who the key players are and what they're trying to achieve.
So for all you UPSC warriors out there, think of this deep dive as a mental workout. We're giving you the tools to really dissect these tough problems.
Absolutely.
And develop insightful arguments that will make your answers shine. Okay, UPSC champions, we are back for the final part of our deep dive into the Iranian Revolution and its lasting impact.
The grand finale.
It really is. We've explored the causes, the rise of Islamism, the Arab-Israeli conflict. I mean, we've really been all over the place.
We have. It's been a whirlwind.
It's been a whirlwind tour of some of the most challenging issues in international relations.
For sure. And remember, folks, this isn't just about memorizing facts and dates for your exam. It's about really developing those analytical skills. You're going to need them to tackle those UPSC questions head on.
Absolutely. You got to be able to think critically. So in this last part, we're going to shift gears a little bit.
Okay, I like it.
We're going to look ahead.
The future. What's next?
Exactly. What are some of the potential trajectories of these issues? What challenges and opportunities do we see on the horizon?
Crystal ball time.
A little bit, yeah. But seriously, understanding these trends is crucial, not just for history buffs, but for anyone who wants to understand what's happening in the world today and what might happen in the future. So let's start with Iran.
Okay, back to Iran.
We've talked about their revolutionary zeal, their nuclear ambitions, their goals in the region, but it's important to remember that Iran is not a monolith.
Right. Not everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. There are divisions, different factions, all competing for power. Our sources highlight the struggle between those hardliners and the reformers. Those clinging to the original ideology of the revolution and those who want to take a more moderate path.
Yeah, it's an ongoing tension for sure. And we see that playing out in Iranian politics all the time. I mean, look at the election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in 2005. That was a huge swing back to conservative policies.
It was.
But then you have the protests that followed his reelection in 2009, which, let's be honest, was disputed. And that showed there's a real desire for change among many Iranians, a real undercurrent of dissent.
Absolutely. And then more recently, there was Hassan Rouhani, who took a more pragmatic approach, negotiating the nuclear deal with the West. But with that deal in jeopardy now, it's really a question of which direction will Iran go?
Right. Will they double down on that hardline stance, or are they going to try to find a more conciliatory path?
Big questions. And if you're writing those UPSC essays on Iran's foreign policy, this is what you need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
You've got to be able to analyze the internal dynamics, what motivates those different factions, and how all of that might play out on the world stage.
You got it. And speaking of the world stage, another huge factor here is Iran's relationship with the West.
It's a tense one.
It is. Are we going to see more tension and confrontation? Or is there a chance for, some kind of constructive engagement?
Right. And how will the changing global landscape, with China's rise and the shifts in U.S. foreign policy, how's all that going to impact this dynamic?
Yeah, it's a lot to consider.
It's so many moving pieces, so many possible scenarios.
Enough to make your head spin, for sure.
I know, but that's the reality of international relations. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and there are no easy answers.
Makes it fun to study, though, right? Okay, enough about Iran for now. Let's talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict, another issue that's been going on for decades with no end in sight.
No resolution.
Despite all the peace initiatives, it seems like that two-state solution is further away than ever.
I mean, we talked about the roadblocks, the settlements, the security concerns, the whole debate over Jerusalem, the refugee issue. It's such a tangled mess.
A Gordian knot, for sure. And with all the extremist groups gaining ground on both sides, it just feels so intractable.
I know, it can be really discouraging.
But our sources do point out a few reasons for hope. Some people think we need a totally different approach. Instead of that top-down peace process, maybe focus on more grassroots initiatives, get people talking, fostering dialogue, build some understanding between everyday Israelis and Palestinians.
Yeah. And others argue that regional economic cooperation could really incentivize peace, build some interdependence.
Makes sense.
Create some shared interest.
Those are just a few examples of the kind of outside-the-box thinking that we really need right now to break this deadlock. And for our UPSC folks, this is where you can really shine.
Show off what you've learned.
Exactly. Don't just repeat the same tired arguments. Show those examiners that you can analyze this situation critically, come up with potential solutions, articulate your thoughts in a clear and persuasive way.
Absolutely. The UPSC examiners, they don't want robots. They want thinkers.
Right.
They want people who can really engage with complex issues and offer some insightful perspectives. And remember, there's no one right answer here. What matters is that you show you have a deep understanding of these issues, that you can really analyze the complexities and present your arguments in a way that is clear and compelling.
We've given you the knowledge, the historical context, the analytical tools.
You got everything you need.
Now it's up to you to use them.
Put them to work. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question. Considering everything we've talked about, how do you see the relationship between Iran's role in the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli conflict developing in the future?
It's a huge question, but it's one that deserves our attention.
Absolutely.
Our analysis and really our best efforts to find a path toward a more peaceful and just future.
For the whole region and really for the world.
Well said. Keep learning, everyone. Keep questioning and keep striving for excellence.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and helpful on your UPSC journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of topics that matter. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.